Well, thanks for having me, Tim. And I know he asked the question earlier, and I only saw like 2 hands that went up that said, who was here in November for the attribution Web Analytics Wednesday? Yeah, a whopping 3, 4, 5 hands. All right, so we're going to talk a lot more about attribution tonight. We're going to piggyback a little bit on what Jason Packer took you through. We're proud sponsors of Web Analytics Wednesday, and I'm not sure how many of you guys know what Clarivoy does, but we're an attribution company. I'm going to take you guys through today a little bit about what we do, but not to show you what we do, but instead to show you some of the real-world problems that we're trying to solve. And if you saw Jason's, the 5 of you that were here last November, you know, he took everybody through a lot of the Google Analytics models, and he taught them. Let me get hold on a second, real quick. One second. Sorry, I don't want to hide my notes. Yeah, that's fine. Anyway, he took everybody through some of the basics about attribution models and kind of the history of them, how they work, and how to utilize them. And at the end, he asked this question, like, do I need all of this? And when is attribution most worth it? And I listened to it, and there was a question by one of the audience members at the end that basically asked the question, and I'm paraphrasing here, that said, so if I have attribution models, how can I take that to a business, and how can I sell that? How can I prove its value to a business? And so that's really what I'm going to talk to you about, and kind of take you through a real-life business model, kind of what Clarivoy does every day, and just translate it to show you the impact that utilizing multi-touch attribution models can have. We happen to focus on the automotive segment. We do that for a few different reasons. Number one, for some of you that don't know, the automotive segment spends millions and millions of dollars every single month on advertising. Yeah, shocker, right? One of the big things about automotive advertising also is most of the research and shopping behavior that happens down the customer's journey to buy a car, it largely happens online, right? But 99% of all purchases happen offline. So there is a large gap that auto dealers are trying to solve. And so that's where we have hyper-focused in trying to solve that. So some of this stuff is going to have Clarivoy information on here, but it's really not about Clarivoy. It's about how we can solve real-world problems and how multi-touch attribution can solve real-world problems. So this is our mantra, right? This is Clarivoy. You guys are probably pretty familiar with you know, the old retail giant John Wanamaker's famous quote, which is, "Half of my advertising is wasted. The problem is I don't know which half," right? Really common quote. And to think that was certainly 100 years or a century or so before the digital age. But the reality is that still has a large impact on advertisers today, especially in the automotive field. So we're trying to help auto dealers stop guessing and start knowing. And the problem, I know Jason took you guys through some of this, and some of you are certainly very familiar with some of the attribution models. The most common ones are first touch and last touch, or some sort of single source attribution model, right? Where you're giving 100% of the credit for either the sale or the conversion or whatever you want them to do. You're giving 100% of the credit to one thing, which is a huge flaw in attribution methodologies. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to give credit where credit's due. We still want to give credit where credit's due, but we want to fractionalize that credit over all of the different touch points that led to either a conversion or a sale. The idea there is once you've done that, and now you know what is working and what is leading to sales or to website goal conversions, then you can take your current advertising spend and optimize it, just like you would any other advertising program. So take what's not working, shift it over to what you now know is working. So I've said kind of this, I've said the word attribution, and I've said sales, and I've said goal conversions. I've said kind of them interchangeably. I want to make sure that you guys understand, you know, sales attribution is the kind of the holy grail of marketing attribution. We'll talk about that in a minute. Probably the first step or the easier step for our clients is to walk them through web traffic attribution, getting them to understand the traffic that's happening on their site, where that's coming from, which vendors they're utilizing, and how that leads to a goal conversion. So I'm going to take you through some instances of that. The first product that we are going to talk about that we have is web traffic attribution. So you guys are all pretty familiar, obviously, with the default channel grouping in Google Analytics. And this goes back to the question that was asked. How do I monetize this? How do I sell this product? And if you can't just go out and sell attribution models, right? Google gives them up for free, and lots of other places do as well. But you're trying to answer a question for a problem that a business segment has, in our case, automotive. So the first thing we had to do is take a dealer's Google Analytics. So an auto dealer gets, let's say, 10 different vendors. They get 10 different dashboard logins that they have to go to. They kind of inherently rely on Google Analytics. Google Analytics in a lot of ways is very flawed, right? But it's kind of this one source of consistency that a dealer can lean on that quote unquote doesn't have any skin in the game, which we all know is not exactly true, but for this case it is. So for us, we said, oh, how can we make this easier for an auto dealer to look at on a regular basis and make some advertising decisions based off of it? So the first thing that we did was we built some rules to change the default channel grouping to show what we call our clairvoyant attribution channels. Jason Packer was actually a big help in this product, so kudos to him. So we built all these rules behind the scenes because we wanted the dealers, the business segment that we were going after, to be able to look inside their Google Analytics and not just see the sources that the traffic was coming from, but to actually see the people, the vendors, the people they write checks to every single month, to see how they were stacking up against each other at driving website traffic, right? So the first thing we did was that. The next thing we did was we said, it's great, web traffic and who's most effective at driving traffic is really important, but you spend money for a lot of that traffic, and in a lot of cases they spend a lot of money for that traffic. So we needed to put in their spend data. So now we have their spend data in, so we can start looking at it from an efficiency perspective and not just an effectiveness perspective. So we push in through a cost upload tool their advertising spend, so they can start to look, once they get deeper into a product, you could start stacking them up from a cost per acquisition perspective. So now we've got who their vendors are, what channels are driving traffic, how much that they're spending on that traffic. You're seeing the number of conversions that are set up based on the goals that they have set up on their website. So what's a conversion? You know, is it in the automotive world, it's a VDP view or an SRP view, or somebody going to the hours and directions page, or somebody filling out a lead form. All of those types of things are goals, things that you want somebody to do on the website. So now you're stacking up goal conversions in the model comparison tool. And when you see, here are my channels, here's how much I spent on each one of those channels, here are the conversions associated with each one of these channels, and then from a cost per acquisition perspective, you can start to stack them up on an efficiencies perspective to see who's most efficient driving you conversions. Of course, this is all based on last click or last interaction metrics, right? We're all pretty clear. Those are set up pretty well for Google. So we also have pushed in the Clarivoy multi-touch attribution model. Now you can choose, Google offers many different attribution models from which to choose. Ours happens to be a position-based attribution model. But this is one of our clients. This is their Google Analytics page, and I just want to point out something here. And this is how, as we take our dealers through this, I don't know how well you can see that or how blurry that is on the screen, but Auto Trader, for example, at the top, they're spending $13,000 a month for Auto Trader. Under last click interaction, it was driving 252 conversions for a cost per acquisition of $54. On the Clarivoy multi-touch model, and again, this is not giving 100%, right? This is fractionalizing credit across the board. Auto Trader really should have gotten credit for 352 conversions, right? Cost per acquisition comes down to like $38. Now, an auto dealer might say, well, that's still too high for me. When I stack it up against all my other marketing channels, that's too expensive for me. And that's fine. But what I'd like to point out is that the conversions changed by 39.68%. Right? So if an auto dealer, or any other business for that matter, is making advertising decisions and they're utilizing attribution models, and they're utilizing a last click model or a single source first click model, some sort of model, they could be making advertising decisions based on data that is off by almost 40%. That's crazy, right? So that's one of our products that we take through. And really it's a focus on understanding the web traffic, all of the different drivers to the dealer site, and then how they convert based on the goals that they have set up. The next thing I'm going to talk about is for you Monty Python fans, what is often referred to as the Holy Grail of marketing and attribution. And that's really tying everything to the sale. And that's another product that we have with our customers. So this works independently of Google Analytics. This is on our own platform. And how we do that is we take our tracking code and we apply it to the dealer's website. We score and profile every visitor that comes there. We integrate with their vendors. And at the end of the month, we download their sales file. So we get their sales file, everybody that bought a car. Once we get that information, we identify who those people are that bought cars. And we basically go out and find them on the web, right? We want to find who these people are, what their digital fingerprint is, so that we can then track all the things that they did before leading up to a sale. The reality is less than 10% of the market when buying a car will self-identify. Self-identify is fill out a form or provide an email, provide phone number. Go ahead.
Do you have problems with personally identifiable information at that point? I just looked at my own Salesforce. I don't think we could hand you guys over, hey, here's the list of X amount of guys who purchased this month. Go find out everything you did on the web.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So we take in that data, and I'll let Rick here explain how we do that. But basically, we anonymize who that person is, right? So, yeah, well, no, it's the actual person, but we assign them a unique identifier instead of saying that John Smith. Now, don't get me wrong. We have dealers that say, okay, tell me exactly what this person did and walk me through their click path all the way through to buy a car. But we ingest that data, we anonymize that data, but we can still identify what those people did. And then we take it to the dealer and we say, okay, you know, of all the cars that you sold last month, here are the different channels that led to a sale. So think back to what I was talking about earlier. We're still fractionalizing the credit, We're using a rules-based multi-touch attribution model. We are looking at all of the different click trails and touch points that led to a sold vehicle. So we start to see how the different channels that they use stack up. From there, we say, okay, here's how the channels play a role in leading to a sale. Now let's dive into one of those channels and look at the actual vendors. So now we're providing the dealer with, here are the vendors that are a part of the click trail that led to the most sales. Now, this is all, again, from an effectiveness standpoint. We also have a cost upload tool that puts in spend data so you can look at it from an efficiency perspective again. But in this case, because you might look at it and say, well, Edmunds drove 21 car sales. Cars.com drove 163, and TrueCar was a part of 71, and Edmunds is not doing very well. Well, if you're only spending $500 a month on Edmunds, I'm sure they're very happy to get those 21 car sales, right? So it's understanding not just who's most effective, but also who's most efficient at leading to sales. And how we collect this data and how we do what we do is all tied to web analytics. And with that, I want to bring up Rick to kind of walk you through that.
Which is the click button?
The right one.
That one here.
Yep.
So by the way, if you looked at us without an introduction, would you know which one was the technical guy and which one was the sales guy? I was thinking of that when I was standing back there. I was like, all right. So I'm going to talk more about web analytics and how that plays into the attribution that we're doing and some of the other things, and then just some fun things we can do with web analytics, since this is supposed to be a one-on-one, a 101 sort of lecture. There are really three big questions we answer when we do any sort of web analytics that I can think of, and there may be some edge questions, but for the most part, who is using the website? Where did they come from? And what are they doing on the website? So each of those questions has its own unique set of tools to solve the problem and its own business applications when you answer them. So who is using the website? Knock, knock.
Who's there?
Bot. Bot, you thought it was a person. Actually, here's the official technical knock, knock. So we care about who is visiting the website because we can do two things with that data. We can profile the types of people that use our website to help drive marketing decisions about who to go after, who to attract, who are we attracting. And we can retarget. So we can identify somebody who's on the website but maybe hasn't bought something yet, and we want to send them another digital ad. We might want to call them, send them an email, send them a postcard, catch them on the street and say, hey, I saw you were on my website yesterday. You thinking about buying our services again? Whatever techniques work for sales and marketing people. So there's a lot of tools you can use to figure out who's on the website. And the first and most obvious one is when you ask them and they tell you, the self-identified users. That's a great way to tie traffic to people. Some of these tools that people use are a little bit shady, a little bit black hat, a little bit gray hat, but they're out there. And Clarivoy doesn't use the shady tools, at least directly. First-party cookies are a common tool. In this case, you set an identifier on the browser that every time they come to your site, they pass a unique identifier back. And so you know they've been coming back and forth a bunch of times. If you can tie that first-party identifier to anything about them, you can figure out who they are and what they've done and when they've come here. Third-party cookies are similar, except in this case, you send the cookie and assign it to somewhere else, like an ad service network or an ad network or some other third party that keeps track of that for you. Third-party cookies are kind of cool because if you have multiple so a first-party cookie only works on the domain you're on, but if you're working with many domains, a third-party cookie can help you tie people across domains. If they self-identify somewhere else, you can tie them back and figure out who they are. User agent strings tell you about their browser type and their device type and other information about that. But the interesting thing is the panopticlick, which is a little bit out of order here, is a theory that every user agent string is essentially unique, and you can kind of identify somebody's uniqueness like that without any sort of cookies. IP addresses, you can pin down where someone's coming from with some geolocating services on IP addresses. If that correlates with the only house in the neighborhood or something, you might be able to tell who they are. Or at least you can tell lots of people keep coming from this address. Oh, that's Chase Bank's proxy server. No wonder a lot of people keep coming from there, or that one person is so busy on the site. Hidden autocompletes, this is a pretty nefarious technique. So an autocomplete in the browser, you know, you get this form up and it starts pre-populating with names. You can pop a form up behind the page that people are on so they never see it. The autocomplete fills it out, and then you can use JavaScript to scrape that and send yourself data about them. Trojan extensions, browser skins, browser themes, apps. This is varying from everything from a calendar app or something that you might install, or a game that's secretly collecting information about you and sharing it with some third party. There's a lot of these out there. I think Google just yesterday or today shut down a whole bunch of apps that were doing this because everybody's trying to solve this problem who's visiting my website. Google is really good at this. Gmail, Docs, Slides like we're using now. All these apps, Google's identifying you and tying you across all your devices and figuring out who you are. They're really good at giving you free apps, and they're not giving you free apps. They're giving you, they're tricking you into telling you who they are. And local storage is a way to just store things on the end user's computer and then retrieve them. So you can store whatever you want, basically, and if the user isn't paying attention, you can snag that from them.
Are hidden autocompletes illegal?
No, I don't think they're illegal. They're just unethical. Yeah, you can probably get in trouble using them. You can probably have a pretty black eye in the public if you get pinned down as somebody who's doing it. But there are a lot of people doing it, and people are still just figuring out how to catch them. So there's probably lots of other techniques as well. These are the sorts of things we use as web analytics people to figure out who people are when they visit the website, because it helps us answer important business questions. These altogether form something which is commonly referred to as the identity graph. And there are lots of identity graph vendors out there. Google is an identity graph vendor to some extent. LiveRamp. There's a bunch of people out there who play this identity game and then sell the identity services to people who are trying to figure out who's on their website. The challenge, though, is these bots are everywhere. You know, there's some sites I see 80% of their traffic is just bots crawling their site constantly from all over, from Russia, China, Eastern Europe, Southern California, Texas, Indiana. They just crawl and crawl and crawl all day long. And there's lots of ways to identify bots and get them out of your data set, because you don't want to submit profiles or hit counts or anything about your website that's all about how the bots are experiencing your site. You're more interested in how people are experiencing your site, because bots don't usually buy things. User agent strings sometimes tell you. Google and some of the friendlier crawlers will tell you who they are, so you can rip them out. IP addresses are pretty good. If it's coming from a big click farm in Russia, chances are it's not somebody down the street shopping for a car. Behavior patterns are another interesting one. If somebody comes into your site and they click on every single page, and every single page is exactly 15 milliseconds apart, chances are it's not a person doing that, especially because by the time you move your mouse from the top left to the bottom, you've already exceeded that limit. So there's some tools out there that you can get that will look at behavior patterns and identify bots and compare them to humans actually interacting on your site. You can use mouse metrics and stuff too. If the mouse is always very straight lines and there's no jiggle in it or anything, it's probably a bot. And then there's third-party services that can put some sort of cookie or tracking on your site or proxy server in front of it that can remove the bots from your site or at least tell you which ones are bots. So bots are just really pervasive. They're really getting hard to detect. They almost all run JavaScript these days, so you can't just say, well, we put JavaScript on the site and it didn't execute, so it executed, so it must be a human. That doesn't work anymore. So the next slide is the next question. Where did they come from? So if you build a website, somehow you have to drive people to the site, and they may not come. In case you didn't recognize the image, that's from a movie from a few years ago, where the tagline was, if you build it, they will come. So why we're interested in where they came from to get to the site is so we can do marketing attribution. And that's the main reason we care about how they're getting to the site. What out there is driving people to our site? Are we spending money in the right places? The tools here are really not as complicated as trying to figure out who the person is. We often have refer URLs. Some browsers will not share that with you, but most will. And that's a URL is the site where they came from. That really helps figure out where they came from. You can also use UTM codes, which are a Google standard that you put in the URL when somebody comes there that tells you more about what drove them there. Or you can use custom tags and other tags. And lots of people want to obfuscate their marketing campaigns and not use UTM codes. One of the fun things we figured out with UTM codes is you can type anything you want in UTM codes. So if you know somebody's using a lot of Google Analytics, you can, like, in your browser, change the UTM codes and type things in there to send the messages and screw around with them, make up campaign names. How come this campaign's doing so well? There's no security around it. Anybody can type anything they want in there, mess with their fellow marketing people's heads. So once we've parsed and figured out where people come from, we sort and group and organize all that information into something we call a taxonomy. And this is kind of a fancy word that means a way we've grouped and classified the traffic. So at least at Clarivoy, you'll hear the word taxonomy almost every day being discussed in the context of, is this in the right group? Is this in the right classification? Is this really a third-party auto traffic from Edmunds, or is it a bot or whatever? So when you do this grouping, there's a really long tail on the groupings of stuff that comes in that you would never think would drive to your site. And you have no idea how they got to your site from there. But that long tail, hundreds and hundreds of things from places you never heard of. And so you have to kind of group that in an other bucket or some other way, or toss it out. It's up to you depending on your requirements. But the long tail, you can go down this rabbit hole of trying to figure each one of them out and waste huge amounts of time to figure out one click or one view or one source. And sometimes you have to just weigh the business value of that analysis before getting too sucked into it. So here are some types of things that we would classify in attribution. And channel and source are the most common ones we use at Clarivoy. Those are the main things that we're working with most of the time. But we have been exploring some other taxonomy groupings and starting to expose those in our data as well as our company and product mature. And these are some ideas that you could use. There, of course, anything you're really interested in knowing about where the traffic came from, you can group the traffic that way. You could group it by zip code based on the IP address, and that could be an interesting grouping in your taxonomy. So once we've grouped and collected all the data and classified it with a taxonomy, we get a sequence of events for a sale. So they might have started at Google, gone to Bing, opened an email that was sent to them, done a paid search on Yahoo, opened another email, and then purchased. And that's an example of one person. But we're not really interested in why one person bought the car. We're interested in what drives people in general to purchase the car. What sort of things are most significant on the aggregate, because everybody's unique and everybody has a story and no two stories are the same, and you really can't draw a lot of conclusions from one person. So we roll it together, We then apply these models to all of the click trails, and there are more models you could come up with as well. These are a few of the ones in our product that give different amount of credit to different places and positions in the click trail. There's also effects of dimensions, such as whether it was an email open or a display ad impression, whether it was a lead form submission. There's a lot of other things you can include in there that help factor these models. And we aggregate it up, and then we show over time how the different channels are doing. In this example, that red line across the top is their email marketing. And you can see email marketing worked really good in March, but it slowly went downhill and wasn't doing much for them in July. They made some changes, and it bumped up in August, but they're still struggling to get back to the way they were last year. So taxonomy processing is really interesting. You go, well, it's not too hard. You just make up some rules and apply them, and it really isn't. But imagine we had 275 million page views to process, and that's about what Clarivoy is doing every month now. So if I had a rule that I needed to add to the processing, that takes about a millisecond per page view to process. So a database lookup, even if you're on the same machine, is probably not going to happen in less than 20 milliseconds. So just 1 millisecond addition. When we do the math, this adds 3 days and 4 hours of processing to our taxonomy processing. So to solve this, we break it up, and each page view is analyzed for its taxonomy independently and run parallel. And so if we did 12 threads, adding a millisecond only adds 6 hours and 20 minutes to our results for that month. But actually at Clarivoy we do many more than that, and we often will process as many as 1 billion page views in one job. And at the moment, the way it's set up, we're processing about 150,000 page views a minute. So this is a big data challenge. You've got to scale this out, run it on multiple servers, cache a bunch of stuff, try to minimize database lookups, and optimize your code as best we can. We're doing that actually in Python. So the last of the 3 questions that web analytics people try to answer is, what are they doing on the website? We don't do this very much at Clarivoy. Once we've figured out who they are and what channels they came from, we've got enough to tie sales back to the marketing efforts. And what they actually did on the website isn't really of interest in our product line at this point, but we get a lot of questions about it. I want to know how people are doing on my website. And let's talk about some of that and what we can do there for a minute, since this is one of the big 3 questions in my mind of what web analysts do. What we're interested in is visitor behavior patterns on the site. And by learning what they do on the site, we can improve the product features in the site. We can alter the website design to drive them to where we want to go, or discover areas of the site that they're not going that we thought they would go. We can identify issues in the site where the quality is poor. Either the page serve time is very bad, or the user experience is terrible. People aren't spending a lot of time there, or they're spending too much time there. You can learn a lot about your website by looking at what they're doing on the website. And there's lots of tools out there that help you do this. I've listed a couple here. Google Analytics, setting up goals and conversions, at least tells you if they're reaching certain pages on the website that you're trying to get to. Adobe, Pewix, Splunk. If you were to map somebody going through the site and color code the different pages based on the type of page they were, one might be a product page, one might be a search page or whatever, you might have a path that looks like this. They started in the blue circle, they went up to the red, they hit that big circle, and that circle is bigger because they hit it more than once. They went off to another page, then they came back, and then they looped around. And that's kind of a graph view of a single user's path through your website. I thought I just turned the mic off. I didn't. Whew. All right, so that's kind of interesting. And this particular example up here was one I generated when we were doing load testing of the website, and I wanted to see if it was hitting the whole website equally or parts of it differently, and I wanted to compare the load test to what people actually did. I just put this up here as a quick example because this can get really complicated really quickly. We call this the dandelion chart, And we generated this for one of our clients, actually, here at Clarivoy, at their request. And what we're looking at is each of the big clusters that you see up there are their different dealerships' websites. So this is an automotive group.
Rick, you want me to take this part? You want me to explain this one?
Do you want to explain it? You can. All right. And so we're trying to show that sometimes users will shop for the Ford on their site, and then they'll go over to the Chevy site, and they'll shop on the Chevy, and then they might go look at the Hondas, and then they come back. And we wanted to look at some of the interactions as the user bounces around on their different pages before they land on a particular page and end up coming in to buy the car. And as you cluster them, the pages that are very similar pull together, and the pages that are very different move apart from each other. So up on the top up here, there's a couple sites that are very similar to each other. They tend to be close. But this guy over here is way out there by himself and totally isolated. I don't remember which was which, like if that was Ford and Chevy on the left and then Mitsubishi on the right. But it was kind of a splashy illustration of the interaction between all of their websites at this automotive group and how people aren't just shopping in one place before they make the purchase. And I used a tool called Jeffy to do this by building click trails across the sites for the people that we had identified. Another approach is to take your site and build an icicle chart. So on the far end over there on the left, and we read this like reading words, the most commonly hit pages when people first arrive at the site show up. And then as they move through the site, they're color-coded based on the page they were on. And sometimes they go back to other pages, sometimes they stay on the same one, sometimes they reload, until they're way on the right, finally leave the site. So somebody here is a very short path. This is a pretty common thing to hit this page, and then leave. Whereas somebody else might go, and that's a class of pages, not actually a page, like a product, and they hit the product multiple times until they make a purchase or leave. So that's another way to view something that's happening on the site. I prefer these days sand key drawings. I just stole this one off of the internet because I didn't have a good example to share. But in a sand key drawing, it's the same idea. You start over here on the left with the pages they hit when they first arrive at the site, and then work your way through with the bands getting narrower as they resolve to unique paths through your site. And I don't have a particular tool to recommend for generating them. There are a few out there once you have a data set.
Analytics report that has that same
Oh, great.
flow path. I think that's what it's called, matter of fact, flow path.
Another thing you can do is you can look at how often people come back to your site. And this is what I call recidivism, which is how often they return. A long time ago, I used to work in a jail, and we were worried about people coming back to jail. And we did a number of recidivism studies there and what things kept people from coming back. So that word stuck with me, even though it's been a long time since then. So in this case, I've sorted the most frequently accessing users to the least frequently accessing users. This is an entire year with 365 days going across left to right. And then the days that they logged in and the days that they didn't. You can see these bands down the chart. Those are the weekends. So for the most part, people weren't using the site on the weekends. It sort of gets lighter around August because fewer people are logging in due to summer vacations. And then there's a gap around Thanksgiving as well. And it's just another way to visualize how often people are coming back and when they're using the site. And I thought it was kind of a fun visualization to do. Lastly, I've been talking about post-activity analytics, where we look at how people used the site yesterday. There's also a need, how are people using the site today and how is it performing? So this was a real-time strip chart where each of the bands going across is a different page on the site, and then it's time from left to right, so it's constantly scrolling this way. And I had a couple of views of this one where the darker red it is, the more people are hitting that page, or the darker the red it is, the worse the page serve time is. And so as a page in particular starts to degrade in performance, it's something to send back to look at. If a page suddenly has no traffic and it had a lot of traffic before that, something might be broken on it. It was a way for an operations team to have a scrolling visualization of the activity on their website in real time as they manage things. So lastly, we know cats invented the internet, and you can't really talk about the World Wide Web without some kitten pictures. I took these this morning, and no, that's not a kitten there in the upper corner, but he thinks he's a cat. So I put him in anyhow. And that's all I have.
Do you have any questions?
Sure.
Yeah. I bought a car a while back for my son. The way I did it is I spent a lot of time looking for the exact year, make, and model that I wanted before I ever even thought about looking at what dealers have. And I certainly would never just go to a dealer's website and start looking around. I just don't see that as, I think that is the last step. Are you seeing that more? What does the data say about how people actually decide?
Well, on the outliers side of things, I had a guy with 182 paid search clicks to the dealer's website before he bought the car. And that car had a gross margin of something like $600, not counting the cost of the paid search clicks. And what he did is he started March 15th or March 30th when he got his tax refund. And then he kept checking the site looking for the car that he wanted and used Google paid search every time. And then in September, they finally had the car he wanted, and he converted the next day. Most of the time, that's not the case. Most of the time, people come to the dealer's site, look up the phone number, and go to the site and buy a car. Or because they have a strong brand affinity, particularly with the dealership, and a strong brand affinity with the particular vehicle they want to buy. We do see people surfing around a certain class of cars, looking at different models. Like, I know I really want an F-150, but I'm not sure if I want a green one or a blue one, or if I want the one with the red hubcaps, or whatever the features are that make people poke around. So they'll drill into a product site and poke around. We don't do a lot of analytics inside the site as to what people are doing. What we're mostly interested in is how did they get there, and who are they? So they came from Google paid search, they came from somewhere else.
And one of the big things that we see, to follow your point, is that we see them use those third-party aggregators, those portals, right? So they'll do a lot of their researching what type of car they want, and they'll use the autotrader.com or the cars.com or one of those types of sites where it's agnostic in a lot of ways what dealer group is. In fact, there's been a bit of a swing, for a long time. Back when my parents bought cars, up until recently, that people were very brand loyal to the type of car, to the brand of the car, the Chevy, the Ford. That is swinging. That pendulum is swinging drastically, and there's less brand loyalty there, which is probably no surprise to you. So what smart dealers are doing is trying to establish their brand as a dealer. So you'll see a lot of advertising about the perks, about about oil changes for life, about customer service, things like that. You'll start to see they're really emphasizing that because they're trying to create brand loyalty with the actual dealer rather than the model.
I actually did a lot of we did a lot of advertising. I work for Clairvoy too, and for auto dealers. And what they're seeing as a trend is that people don't shop at dealerships anymore. That the number of visits that someone makes before they make a purchase is down. It's approaching 1. So so people they do their research online. We did do a lot of dynamic used car ads where the ads were very specific: year, make, model, color, and because people are very specific when they're looking for used cars. And this guy told us that one of the managers told us that when someone finds that used car that fits their criteria that they want, they've already missed 4 of them that were sold before they got there. So it's become almost entirely an online thing. And like the smart dealers say, when someone shows up at your dealership, that's your sale to lose, because unless you really mess up, they're going to buy a car.
I have a question on non-digital attribution to digital channels. So our company's been investigating in a much more serious way how we can attribute what we're doing both on TV, radio, and print, and correlate those results to conversions digitally. Does Clairvoy play in that space? And if so, what type of logic do you use for that method of attribution?
Before we had the sales attribution product, we had a TV attribution product, and it still is an important product in our product offering. We didn't talk about it here because it has less web attribution, but we have a proprietary algorithm that I think we published before. It uses a graph model that shows the interaction between web traffic, phone traffic, and TV spots, and then highlights the TV spots and creatives and networks and channels that are performing the best, both from an efficiency and an effectiveness perspective.
We've been asked a lot about radio as well, and we haven't done it. One of the big factors in our attribution model for television advertising is time, right? So kind of immediately after a spot runs, we look for that lift in traffic on a site. With radio, it's just a little bit different because people are mostly listening during drive time, and that interaction doesn't happen quite as quickly. So there can be a lot of false positives if you're doing that. There's some other ways to do it. You could certainly pulse radio, like be on a week and then off a week and then back on, and kind of measure that impact. You can do that within your Google Analytics, looking at things like organic search, paid search, direct traffic. But yeah, our focus has been TV. And really, if you think about the handheld device, right, how that's kind of changed the TV viewing behavior, we've seen a kind of a drastic increase of that 2-screen watching, so you can kind of see that immediate impact when the time's right and the message is right.
So for print, you can, and you can do this for TV and radio as well, you can do vanity URLs, either an entirely vanity domain or some sort of path on your site, hopefully very simple so it's easy to type in, or a QR code if you put that in your ad. People do that still. And then that lets you know that that person at least saw that ad at one point or another. When we were doing vanity URLs, I did see 6 months after the TV spot ran, people still coming in on that URL. And that was kind of surprising to me. Like, were they watching videotapes of the show and then connecting to it? Or was there some other way that that was getting exposed outside of the spot itself? But and that doesn't tell you everybody, because most people will go to Google, they'll type in the name and do a paid search click.
That's our tech guy talking about videotaping TV.
Well, you know, I do have gray in my beard, so I remember videotapes.
What's your guys' thought on applying a attribution model to the sales cycle? So for our company, we sell private jets. We want to know what brought you in from marketing and converted you to become a lead on the .com site. But usually that sales cycle could take many months, if not years, once you've already clicked, hey, I'm interested. So do you guys or any competitors you know of, or do you even suggest applying an attribution type approach to like a Salesforce.com and saying you got hit with a phone call, in-person meeting, a dinner, a concert that we took you to? Like, once you've already entered into our system, how do you look at attribution from there until they buy a product with a long sales cycle like that?
Well, I mean, even cars are kind of a long sales cycle for some people less so. You have to just put them all in the click trail or the touch point event list and keep track of them. It's no different than a shorter sales cycle. And so cars are what we call a high consideration product in marketing sometimes. And it's a product where you rattle around at the top of the funnel for a long time before you fall through and actually make the purchase. And trying to find all those events where you're rattling around at the top of the funnel is tricky the longer the cycle is, no doubt.
So a lot of the guys that we would sell to, they're 70, 80 years old. They don't use the internet. They don't use digital at all. A lot of them have like Hotmail accounts or whatever, right? So these are guys that are responding way more to phone calls and in-person interactions and events, and that kind of takes you out of that ease of just slapping some JavaScript on something. But is there a way that you can take recorded data points within a CRM tool and apply attribution there?
I don't know of any CRMs doing multi-touch attribution and multi-touch models. Maybe
I don't know of any either, but I mean the methodology is the same, right?
Yeah, and we're really focused on automotive, but what we're doing would apply directly to that sort of a model, data set.
Jason, do you have any thoughts on that? I just want to put you on the spot.
Nice configuration of those channel grouping, though, Jason. Good job. So thanks. I'm going to actually ask the last question because I feel like you glossed over it a little quickly and might have left it a little unambiguous. When you worked in the prison, what were you getting was that by choice, or did you just have, was that kind of you were picking between the laundry and the library?
He was in the machine shop.
No, I had, we had computers there, and it was in the early days of using computers in investigations and fingerprint technology.
When you left at night, did you go into a car and drive home?
Yes.
Okay.
But I did have bars on the window in my office.
Okay.
And I shared my office with the riot gear lockers.
Wow.
So when a big event was going down, all the deputies would come running into my office and pulling open the cabinets, and they would start putting on all this gear and putting the helmets down and racking their shotguns and strapping tear gas grenades to their belts.
Change of plans. Dave is not on for February. Rick's going to come back and tell prison stories. To hell with analytics. So thanks. That was great. I'm sure you guys can stick around for maybe a little bit if anybody's got other questions.